r/Nosleep. Posted by u/eekpeek. I bought an antique mirror at a garage sale. Something is wrong with the reflection. Now, I've always been a fan of antiques. I mean, who doesn't love an old part of someone's history? I started collecting them as a teenager. Mainly just as a hobby, I never planned to make a career out of it. The hobby sort of died as I grew into an adult, but I always made sure I would at least give a look at a few antique stores during vacations. When I met my wife, one of the things that drew us close was her equal love for antiques. We would get a few here and there, and it was always nice to have something I loved to share with somebody else. A while ago, we decided to go to a garage sale. It's something we do every so often. She loves it more than I admittedly. While walking through what they had to offer, I caught my wife frozen, glancing into what seemed like a very old, very large, antique-looking mirror. Her eyes lit up as she looked back at me. I walked up to her and glanced at the mirror. "Sweetheart, this is old, and it's very filthy." Not quite the looker either. I tried to sound as endearing as I could. Her eyes darted back to me. "We just have to get the mirror, darling. It has such a charm to it." Her voice was song-like and very convincing. I could tell she really wanted this ugly mirror. It was just a mirror. I thought to myself, if it'll make her happy. I wish I would have followed my instincts. When we first took the mirror home, I scrubbed the frame for hours. It didn't look much better when I finished, but it was better than nothing. My wife chose to hang it right at the top of the stairs mounted to a wall. I remember thinking it was an odd placement, but I didn't argue. It was eerie seeing yourself every time you walked up the stairs. It didn't seem to bother her a bit though. At first, I'd even catch her staring at the top landing of the stairs for minutes at a time. Weird, but maybe she's feeling more self-confident lately. It seemed plausible at the time. At least, I hoped that's what the case was. I'd say it was about a week before things started to get really strange. After waking up late one morning, I walked out of the bedroom to see my wife staring into the mirror. Her eyes were bloodshot. It looked like she hadn't blinked in who knows how long. I rested my hand on her shoulder. "Sweetheart, are you alright?" My voice echoed with worry. She peeled her eyes away from the mirror and looked at me. "Oh, you're awake. I'll make some coffee." Her voice was monotone. After she walked away, a realization had dawned on me. I don't remember her ever coming to bed. Did she ever come to go to sleep? Now, my wife is fantabulous cook. She always had been, and I've always admired that about her. I made my way down into the kitchen and was shocked to see my food presented to me so quickly. Everything was already set up and ready for me to eat. With her back turned towards the sink, I thanked her. Upon looking at the meal she had prepared, I realized it didn't look like anything she had cooked before. I held back vomit as I cut into the pancake. Maggots crawled out in every direction. "What the fuck is this?" It came out more aggressive than originally intended. Her head snapped in what seemed to be a 180-degree turn. I winced. "You don't like the breakfast I cooked for you?" Her voice was different than I had ever heard. Sharp, but deep. Almost a growl. I couldn't do anything but smile and apologize. I'll admit I was thoroughly wigging the hell out on the inside. The next night I decided to set up a camera in the upstairs hallway. I just wanted to make sure my wife was okay. I was really starting to worry. She had always been a sweet and kind lady. This was totally unlike her in every way. I thought this would have been a harmless way to see what she was doing in the middle of the night. That night I stayed up to watch my wife. Every hour got weirder and weirder. Most of the night, she just sat there stared for hours on end into the mirror. It didn't look like she was blinking at all. It wasn't until 3 a.m. that things took a turn for the worse. My wife was started to stretch and contort her face, followed by a chilling, spine-tingling laugh. She started to stretch her body in ways that made cracking sounds along the entire upper floor. I winced again and decided I needed to intervene immediately. By the time I had approached her, I could see blood dripping from her ears. Her eyes were bulging and releasing some sort of fluid. I was overwhelmed by the sight of her condition. She wasn't responding to anything I was saying, so I picked her up. She lied limp as I put her on the bed. "I'm calling a doctor, and that mirror is getting the hell out of here first thing in the morning," I thought to myself. I lied next to her, just watching her. I couldn't fall asleep. Eventually, I did fall asleep. When I woke I could hear my wife in the kitchen. I approached her gently. When she turned around, her face was completely normal. Her mannerisms and personality were just like they used to be. I wanted to ask her what about is going on, but all I managed to say was, "Did you sleep well last night?" She nodded with a grin. "Very well, actually. That made me even more uncomfortable that she was acting like everything was fine. I wished she would have tried to remember. She had to remember. That night as I was getting ready for bed, I was brushing my teeth in the bathroom mirror. When I rose my head to check for any toothpaste residue around my mouth, I was frozen in fear. My reflection was smiling. As I went to touch the mirror, my reflection jolted back. It started to contort and stretch my face in impossible ways. It almost trance-inducing, but somehow I was able to look away and race to my bedroom. My wife was already asleep. I, on the other hand, was in for another sleepless night. A few weeks went by, and things didn't get much better. Every few days I would notice new scratches and bruises on her face. Concerned, I asked her if she'd like to see a doctor. "No, I've just been scratching myself in my sleep is all," she said in her usually chipper and happy voice. I looked at her with a worried expression, but she turned away. I dropped the subject right at the moment, but I really wish I wouldn't have. I regret not doing more to this day. Everything seemed fine the night it all happened. We went to bed, things were relatively normalish. I kissed her good night, and we fell asleep relatively fast. Not soon after we fell asleep, I was awoken by a weird shuffling and then the noise of the bathroom door closing. I looked over to see if my wife was still next to me, but she wasn't. I immediately rose out bed and darted towards the bathroom door. On my way, something caught my attention that stopped me dead in my frantic tracks. The mirror was no longer at the top of stairs. I rushed to the bathroom even more frantic when I realized it was missing. I banged on the bathroom door for well over 10 minutes. Finally, I decided to kick the door down. She was sitting down on the floor behind the sink. She had every mirror that we owned facing her in every direction, with the antique mirror directly in front of her. When I stepped into the view of the mirror, I saw her face. Her eyes were completely hollowed out, blood dripping from the empty sockets. Her tongue was partially severed. Her face was cut into a permanent smile. Her skin was translucent, and her fingernails looked like they had been ripped off by the cuticle. Her arms and hands were covered with blood. Suddenly I could feel my actual wife's presence glaring at me. When I finally pulled away from the mirror and looked at her, I was in absolute terror. She looked completely mutilated. I'm going to call an ambulance. What did you do? How could you do this to yourself? I stuttered as I tried to form a coherent sentence. Her hollow eye sockets were staring directly at me as the words fell out of her mouth. Her now mutilated mouth began to twist. "You don't think I'm pretty now, darling? Isn't this everything you've ever wanted?" Her words were sharp and had a deep rasp to it. Before I even had the chance to respond, she contorted her legs and arms and began to run. She was fast, and I could hear every bone breaking as she ran. I knew I couldn't catch her, so I immediately called the police. After months of searching, they never did find my beloved wife. I've since sold the house and every mirror we owned. As I was unpacking into my new place, not far from where we used to live, as I had hoped she'd come back one day, I pulled out that nasty antique mirror. I knew I had gotten rid of it, but I figured I'd sell it since I still had it, to anyone who would buy it. Lately that hasn't been the case. It's been a while now, and I'm starting to feel attracted to the mirror. Every day it shows me something different. Something better. A better version of myself. Something I could be. Maybe my wife was really onto something. Maybe I can be just as beautiful as she was before she left. Maybe the mirror does actually show us how to look perfect.